welcome to another episode of the MI Mental Podcast. My name is Dr. Sabine Fonderson, and in this podcast, we examine real life cases involving healthcare professionals and their encounters with the legal system. Today's episode is part of my Doctors in Court edition, and I'll be diving into an important case that deals with professional ethics, boundaries in psychiatric care, and consequences of breaching those boundaries. This case revolves around a psychiatric nurse accused of crossing ethical lines by entering into an inappropriate relationship with a vulnerable patient. The issues raised in this case highlight the importance of maintaining professional boundaries in the mental health field, where patients are often in especially vulnerable positions. As always, I'll be using fictional names to protect the privacy of the parties involved, but the details are based on real events. Let's get into the timeline, the plaintiff's case, the defense, and the final disciplinary decision. Here's the timeline of key events in this case. 21st of March 2008. Our patient, who we'll call John in this case, was admitted to a psychiatric clinic for treatment related to a combination of addiction and psychiatric disorders. During his stay, he was assigned to a psychiatric nurse we'll call Emma as his primary caregiver. In April 2008, John was initially placed in Unit 3 for diagnostic purposes, but he later moved to Unit 2 for active treatment. Nurse Emma was responsible for overseeing his daily progress in treatment, and they had regular one-on-one meetings. Mid-May of 2008, just 2 weeks after being transferred to Unit 2, John went home for a weekend's leave. And during this time, Nurse Emma contacted him outside of work hours, and they began a personal and intimate relationship. In June 2008, John's treatment was completed and he was discharged from the clinic. Despite his discharge, the relationship between John and Nurse Emma continued. However, the relationship was kept secret due to restrictions in Nurse Emma's employment contract, which forbade such relationships with current or recent patients. In late June 2008, after an episode where John became drunk and aggressive, Nurse Emma realized that the relationship was inappropriate and ended it, following advice from her supervisor. At this point, John had already experienced a significant emotional decline, which he attributed to the failed relationship. Now, this timeline sets the stage for John's formal complaint against Nurse Emma, which he filed shortly after their relationship ended. John's formal complaint against Nurse Emma focused on two key issues. Number one, emotional and sexual exploitation. John accused Nurse Emma of exploiting him emotionally and sexually during his vulnerable state as a psychiatric patient. He argued that Nurse Emma initiated and encouraged their relationship while he was still undergoing treatment, which placed him in an even more emotionally fragile position. Accusation number two, breach of professional boundaries. John claimed that Nurse Emma violated professional ethical standards by engaging in a relationship with him during and shortly after his treatment. He believed that as his primary caregiver, she had a duty to maintain strict personal boundaries and prioritize his mental health, which she failed to do. John emphasized that the emotional aftermath of the relationship, combined with his ongoing psychiatric issues, led to a significant decline in his mental health. Now, let's take a look at Nurse Emma's defense against these accusations. Consensual relationship post-treatment. Nurse Emma admitted that she entered into a personal and intimate relationship with John, but argued that the relationship only became intimate after he was discharged from the psychiatric clinic. She maintained that the relationship was consensual and not a result of manipulation or exploitation. She emphasized that John was no longer her patient when the relationship became sexual, concerning the lack of support and inexperience. Nurse Emma explained that she was a relatively new nurse, having graduated just a year before in 2007. She claimed that the psychiatric clinic had not provided her with sufficient support or guidance on maintaining boundaries with patients, particularly in complex cases like John's. Nurse Emma acknowledged that the relationship was inappropriate and expressed regret for her actions, but she believed that her lack of experience and the chaotic environment in the clinic contributed to her missteps. Nurse Emma's defense centered on the argument that while she understood her actions were wrong, the relationship had developed organically and was not an attempt to exploit John. Now let's take a look at what the disciplinary board said and how they ruled on the case. Exploitation of a vulnerable patient. The board found that Nurse Emma's relationship with John, even if it became intimate after his discharge, was inappropriate due to the power dynamic that remains between them. As John's primary caregiver during his treatment, the Nurse Emma held a position of authority and influence over him, and the board determined that this made the relationship exploitative regardless of when it began. Breach of professional boundaries. The board ruled that Nurse Emma had clearly violated professional ethical standards by engaging in a relationship with a recent patient. They cited the National Code of Conduct for Nurses, which explicitly forbids intimate relationships between healthcare professionals and patients due to the inherent vulnerability of patients in psychiatric care. The board emphasized that psychiatric patients are particularly susceptible to emotional manipulation, making boundary violations especially serious. The final ruling. The disciplinary board issued a formal reprimand to Nurse Emma. While they acknowledged her lack of experience and the chaotic work environment, they concluded that her actions represented a serious breach of professional ethics. The board also expressed concern about Nurse Emma's ongoing work with psychiatric patients, highlighting the need for improved supervision and training. Now, let's take a moment to explain some of the medical and ethical concepts that are key to this case. Professional boundaries. These are the invisible lines that separate professional relationships from personal ones in healthcare. Maintaining these boundaries is crucial, especially in mental health settings where patients are emotionally vulnerable. When a healthcare provider crosses these boundaries, it can lead to exploitation and harm. Psychiatric vulnerability. Psychiatric patients, particularly those with addiction and mental health disorders, are often more emotionally vulnerable than patients with physical ailments. Their heightened vulnerability makes it imperative for healthcare professionals to maintain strict boundaries to avoid taking advantage of the power dynamics in the therapeutic relationship. Understanding these concepts is essential to grasping why Nurse Emma's actions were deemed unethical by the disciplinary board. As we wrap up today's episode, here are 2 questions I would like you to think about. Question number 1. How can healthcare providers better manage professional boundaries, especially in fields like psychiatry, where patients are emotionally vulnerable? Providers should seek ongoing supervision and clear guidelines from their institutions. They should also reflect on their emotional involvement with patients and seek professional support if they find themselves crossing those boundaries. Question number 2. What are the long-term impacts on patients when healthcare professionals cross boundaries, and how can institutions better prevent these situations? When professionals cross boundaries, it can cause emotional harm, it can cause setback, and it can damage the patient's trust in their healthcare systems. Institutions should offer clear training on boundary management and provide adequate support systems for healthcare workers, especially those in high-stress environments. Thank you for joining me today on this deep dive into ethical boundaries in psychiatric care. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure to subscribe and check out more of my Doctors in Court edition cases on the MI Mental podcast. Until next time, take care.